the FaceTime or the things that you normally would when you are in personal connection with others. But I think as far as STEM and STEAM is concerned, I love the aspect of that A in STEAM. You know, arts allows for you also to be able to contextualize all of the things that come to you. And so as a young person, I would imagine that the future that we are going to help curate for them has to be one that can help them contextualize and critically think through all of the data that they are receiving. Because in a time like today, especially I have a young daughter as well, she's receiving so many signals of information, and the ability for them to be able to distinguish signal from noise and be able to believe in themselves, to have that self-belief to move forward and make, you know, either a good decision or a decision that will help them learn, I think is very, very important.
Awesome, thank you. I want to say, like, I have a little different view of like the STEAM, right? For us, it's like, I think art's in everything. I think creativity is in everything. The creative thinking. For me, it's like we're always kind of bifurcating or chopping up where arts go, where does tech go, where does, engineering. And I think all of those play a factor in so many things. And I think we undermine education when we try to separate, because then it says, well, art is not really like this technical STEM driven workforce. And it is, it's all a part of it. And so I think if we raise up all of the disciplines and all of the industries, yes, I understand, we're talking about technology, but again, it runs through everything. And how do we meet the needs of computer science as well as engineering, as well as all of the other things that make the world a wonderful place in which we enjoy all the other marketing and animation and advertising and all of these other areas that require tech and business strategies and engineering strategies, and yes, in non-traditional ways and traditional ways, into aviation and agriculture and all of the other things that are very important. Also too, like I feel like, when you talk about challenges that a lot of educational institutions face and providers, I want to roll into that, because a lot of things that we're talking about uh, really relies on funding. We can talk about all of these amazing things, all of this wonderful things that students have to do and get into AI and get in, and Tracy talked about, the programs that are not existing, even to get into some of the computer science and just a quick little tip, like my sister was talking about, she's a teacher, she's been a teacher for 20 years in the inner city community of Chicago. And she was talking about the first thing to go in those schools are the libraries. I mean, just something basic as a librarian and books. So when you talk about funding and we have to really get off of this kind of high level of expectation and what we think, and get really practical and granular into the grassroots, because the funding is so important when they're not programs, they're not sustained, they're not multi-year. And then when we talk about nonprofits, which I can speak from in a painful way, is that even a lot of corporations, I've been offered, $5,000 to touch 100 girls, and so when you talk about that, you talk about the reality of, are you really investing, or is it for your newsletters? Is it for, to check a box, which a lot of things are, and we have to be honest with where we are. That's why we are where we are, because there's no honesty and there's no, and I'm not saying, when I say that, I don't mean no one is being honest, no one is really trying, there's no authenticity. But if we just look at it and the problems that we have, we all have to take ownership, even if we feel like we're doing our best, because no one can shirk responsibility. And we have to pour more money into the programs, and then to the providers, to the community organizations, particularly those of color, because the money goes to the Boys and Girls Clubs, they go to the bigger organizations, but then those who are leading the organizations and women of color, we don't get the funding. We get kind of like the last spend. We don't get the big money. And so therefore, we're not surviving, we're not thriving, and we're not able to touch the communities that we know so well because we come from them and that we serve. And so, that's really key when you talk about all of the wonderful things that we're going to talk about today. Where's the money? Where is it going? And is it consistently going? Is there long-term decades of commitment to real change? And so I want to kind of know what you think about that, Olivera, when it comes to the challenges in the institutions as well as corporations and community organizations.
So thank you for that question. So it's a great introduction actually to what I was thinking and what I was going to say. So I think one of the top priorities that we have is the digital divide. So we have to figure out how do we put a bridge over this big digital divide that we currently see in our communities all across North America. And you're absolutely right. We have to turn to the big corporations. We have to ask them for the commitment to work with us to build these bridges and to enable like broadband and connectivity to all kids and people living in all communities, not just in big city, but also in rural communities. Because like throughout this pandemic, it became very clear that connectivity is not just being on internet. Connectivity is right now, how do we get our online education? Our education is smart education. It's education everywhere and anywhere. Also, how do we get our healthcare? And going back to that, to what you said about school being a libraries, I totally agree with you. My mother was a teacher too, so I have a big community of teachers in my families. Like we need to work with them. The curious mind, we need to help them, give them a technology and teach them how to improve the teaching quality, especially right now when everybody's learning. So I 100% agree with you. I think this is the biggest obstacle and it should be our top priority. And we should definitely be turning not just to big corporations and asking these corporate citizens to help us out, but also to government. It's a shared responsibility to do this, to equally spread these digital dividends across the society in all different regions.
Can I add another piece to that too? Because I definitely believe as well that corporations are becoming increasingly involved in education, not only in the US, but around the world. And we need to make sure that they strive a balance between direct and engagement and policy interaction for more long-term strategy change. And we see it, for example, on the Google side, and I'm sure other corporations are doing it too, where they're providing they're supporting the edtech needs of schools. They're adopting classrooms. They're outfitting, these schools with computer labs or maker spaces. They're providing professional development for these educators. They are creating, or orchestrating or supporting classes and content around CS, computer science, and STEM. And they're also providing internships so that they provide this employability link back into the same corporations.
Yeah, thank you, Eve. And Tracy, I'm sure you have, obviously at Microsoft and all the work that you're doing, that you have something to probably add to that as well.
Yeah, I think two quick thoughts, maybe quick, but three, but I'll make them quick. One is I just think that governments need to carry more of the water, and that, our people that live in these countries need to understand that, again, that is the way to equitable access to skills that our students and young people need for employability. All of the amazing work, Tracy, that you do, as well as other nonprofits, and this might be controversial, and this is Tracy's opinion, not Microsoft's opinion, but it's plugging a hole that shouldn't exist. It just shouldn't exist. If we had equitable access to quality education for all students, not that I want to put anyone out of work, but I'm sure you'd find another hole to plug. but there shouldn't be one because that is what our public education system to do. So advocating for policies that increase funding for teacher professional development. It is a tragedy that not every community, let alone school in the US alone, has access to broadband high-speed internet. An embarrassment in today's 21st century. So one, I think, policy demanding more from government to support so that every student can have that access. The second thing that I wanted to just touch on, Tracy, is you're absolutely right. For whatever reason, Black-led, specifically Black-led organizations, nonprofit organizations are funded less, are required to jump through more hoops, do more reporting. I don't believe that this is conscious. I believe it's, unconscious bias, but, this is data that you can see in some, bridge span research. And so Microsoft, we're really trying to move towards a more trust-based philanthropic motion where our grants go to operational funds, which is the coveted funding for nonprofits. And just, we haven't announced who is receiving those grants yet. That's coming very soon. But we specifically offered a program to Black-led nonprofits who serve Black and African American communities, and not just about, giving money and training on Microsoft technology. It's technology neutral, and what we're providing is tech, transformation resources, curriculum and content resources, again, not just ours, but, surfacing other great content that the industry has. And then lastly, professional development communities, providing a space where these leaders can learn from each other. And then the third thing is that industry needs to work together. So very quickly, we have a program called Microsoft TEALS, where since its inception, we provided computer science education to 85,000 students in high schools across the country. And the only way we do that is by asking tech volunteers from across the industry, including Google and Amazon and our cooperators, you could say. Over 650 companies provide tech volunteers to team teach computer science in the classroom. And this is another way that we can help plug goals. We need to work together as an industry.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Tracy. I just want to say that, and I don't know if I'm clear on what you're saying, but I want to affirm that I believe it's everybody's responsibility and government should play a key role. But I also think companies that are in, that are, you're making money from these communities. We're consumers. We are helping these companies thrive, so that money needs to go back into the communities that support corporations and companies, their products. We're spending thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. So how do that accountability come back into the community in really tangible ways? That's really important. So hopefully all of us will, my mom used to always say it takes a village. It's corny, but it's real. And hopefully we all can just say, what can we do to play our part, even when people are falling short and the government totally is falling short, but that we all need to continue to step up, and there's room for that. I want to go to AJ because of time. AJ, I want to ask you about kind of holistically, kind of what do you think, like some of the things that we can do from a holistic perspective? Because we always know it's not one thing, right? We talked about funding, we talked about mentorship, we talk about all of these things, but like, what do you see as a holistic solution?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about this, one of the things that, poked my heart a little bit of what Tracy was talking about with the work they're doing with Microsoft, the word you used was access, right? Funding is important. And I think, Tracy, you also talked about, okay, how are we going to be able to give back to these communities in a very meaningful way, right? And so one thing we can do, and I'm a huge proponent that if we are going to work on the future, we have to work with the future as well. And what I mean by that is, how can we create the conditions to build trust and empathy on the folks that are working in these organizations and the teachers and educators as well, because that is a big partnership, right? One thing that could be done is the ability for us to fund internships for teachers to come in. We have internships for college folks and university folks. Could we fund for teachers to have internships in these organizations to see what's actually being built there and hopefully help work on things that will eventually touch their education sphere? On the other end, could companies that you talked about being able to give back to the community in a meaningful way have the ability to fund an externship for a technology professional to go in and maybe help work hand in hand with an educator for a quarter, a semester, or something like that? And the ability to be able to do it in ways that I would say are actionable, versus spending maybe on like PR or things like that we mostly see where funding goes to in certain areas, I think could be really meaningful, because then it creates the conditions for a dialogue to happen. It creates for those unexpected collisions of perspectives and the diversity of thought that both worlds, who currently live in very different spaces right now, could probably benefit from, right? So those are the things that I think about holistically, and it can be done in very simple ways, where you can experiment with that. Right. I think with the government pieces, we think about these, they have to be rolled out programs nationally. And I think there is an opportunity to even do some experimentation in seeing what, experiences and insights you get out of that to be able to kind of curate and build on top of it. But being able to create the trust and empathy in those communities, I think the stronger you make those connections, even with parents, right? The ability to be able to do that so everyone has the ability to have the diverse perspectives will lift the opportunity for folks to be able to have access to these things. It will just come naturally versus, trying to figure out, oh, okay, where did all of this, good intent go? Right? Oh, it went into an actual project that had an impact on a local school. And I think as large organizations, it's very easy to think we have to blanket everything, but it's in the impact of being able to have effect in your local community. Do some of our top professionals or top performers in our organization or leaders in our organization know the educators in their community? Are they working directly with them? Are we having consistent dialogue, or are we just talking to the same people that we talk to all the time and not really looking for those alternative and diverse perspectives that can give us a way to maybe tackle a problem in a different way?
I love that. I love that. And what you're saying is it should happen in every aspect of community, right? Kind of learning exactly who you're serving. And then also taking traditionally, education teachers into other areas so that they can also give back through their teaching, right? Because how do you give what you don't know and you haven't experienced if you've been teaching for 40 years in the classroom or 20 years or 10 years? And so I think that's awesome. And again, of course, all of that boils down to funding and people committing to those things. And I think we talked about so much good stuff in this short period of time with inclusivity, because now you're talking about including community teachers into the corporate space and including employees into the community that they serve and that we're looking to impact. But we're also talking about diversity of thought, diversity of disciplines, utilizing all of these things. We're also mentors and project-based learning. And how can all of these things kind of come together in a really holistic way? And unfortunately, a lot of times when we talk about experimenting with programs, they don't get to people of color. These are not the programs they're experiencing because they're surviving, right? They're not thriving, they're surviving, and they're trying to hold on to what they can. Just like a quick little lightning round, just because of time, I would love to kind of capture like what you see as your role going forward. Of course, yes, your company's role, you can add that in personally, and just choose like one or two things that you would really like to see. And AJ, why don't you go first since you have been going final. So why don't you go first and letting us know what your thoughts are?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll keep it deep and brief. I think personally, an involvement moving forward is getting curious, asking why not, asking why is something not possible, and getting curious around where time and energy are being focused on, versus just saying, oh, that sounds like a really great initiative. I'm all in support for that. But again, asking the question of what community is this actually benefiting? And how are we giving access to those that may not have it? I think if everyone can even just have that one question in a meeting where you're talking about being able to give opportunities, asking that double, triple click may help people think through it. Because again, I think as Olivera or someone had said it on the panel, it's not even, it's not a conscious bias. Sometimes it's just unconscious. And us being able to just ask an activating question around it, I think could play a very, very simple yet impactful role.
Awesome. Eve.
I absolutely agree with AJ, and I think we definitely all play a role in changing and evolving education. It's something that we can't really outsource to governments or corporations. I personally believe in volunteering. We should all be doing this, volunteer as coaches, as mentors, to provide guidance to students, to help in schools in our communities. I'm a big proponent of learning skills in computer science. I think it helps students thrive in this rapidly evolving world. And I personally work with, code with Google, which is a program that helps everyone get access to collaborative coding and technical skills. And if you're interested, you can find more information at edu.google.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Olivera.
So similar, I'm very frequent speaker at the conferences, especially Women in Technology, Women in Cybersecurity. I actually go to high schools, I go to universities, I speak to females at universities, because right now it's very clear that we don't have enough girls in I'm speaking about cybersecurity because that's my area of expertise. And I'm also reaching out and working with academia, trying to understand where do we have a skill set gaps, what do we need to do to address it, and like what do we need to change in a teaching style or curriculums to actually address these gaps going forward.
Thank you so much. That's great. And Tracy.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, we talked about the policy level, and I think that, the industry does have responsibility there to really try to shift policies that enable that equitable access, and not but. And I think that we really, to build on what AJ said, we really need to trust our communities as, corporations that donate a lot of money to nonprofits and philanthropic activities. We often set them as our objectives rather than really listening to what the community needs are, and then letting them lead and trust that they know the right partners in their community and what their communities need. And then we can play a role in helping them fill that gap.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. And as we kind of close, I want to say that I think that what Tracy said earlier too, which is exciting about companies and yes, government programs and grants and all of that, really investing in operations. I think that's important because a lot of times you are just thinking about a program and the impact, how many people are you going to have impacted by that one program or through that whole course of a year, but not how much it takes for that organization or that program to run and what that means. And then the reality of what's realistic. Sometimes, they want you to spend like $10 per student on teaching them in a program that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So really having a reality check and being able to do the funding, listening to the leaders in the community, those who are on the ground, talking to youth. And a lot of times it comes from top down instead of from down up. And so just being able to really listen, hear our voices, and also networking is so hard. It's so challenging. finding who are the people that you talk to say, hey, I'm here, I exist, believe in me and trust in me, and not that you continue to invest in long-standing organizations because they deserve it, they've weathered the storm, but understanding that there are new innovative ways of education and thinking and teaching, and that there's room for that as well, and that we don't continue to be so traditional in our thinking. And lastly, the standards are too high a lot of times when the support is not there. If the resources are there, great, but you have high standards and expectations, but low entry points of support. So for me, these are all of the things that we need to continue to think about, as we've all have said. And then I'm going to say just a little bit over, because AJ had a great question that she wanted to ask to all of us. And really quickly, like the one piece of advice that you would give to, I would just say your younger self, that you feel that could be helpful in the future, would have helped you in the future. And I'm going to start with Tracy.
So much. What I would say is, this is a little bit off, but basically if I would was able to go back in time and tell myself something, it would be to pay more attention to the moments that bring you energy, cause your heart to flutter, and inspire you, and follow those things, and that will lead to success.
Love it. Olivera.
So similar, I would say, don't stay in an environment if it is not stimulating, engaging, supportive. Just find another workplace.
Great. Eve.
I would say learn to embrace change. Nothing is static, and I think the world evolves are around us, and we need to evolve with it. So really learning to pivot and change is really key.
AJ.
I would say get curious, ask questions, and it's okay if they think you're a little weird.
And I would say, as the youngest of 11 from a single parent, never let anything stop you. Don't let lack of anything, or your gender or your race, determine your future. And then to make sure that you persist and just keep bugging people, asking people, and somebody will trust and believe in you and give you that next step. And just one step at a time. Sometimes it's, and I say in COVID, even more so, one step at a time, but believe that the impossible is possible, and never stop. Because if you desire it and you're passionate about it and you believe it, that's all you need. And with that, I would say thank you, ladies. You are amazing. I'm so glad to connect with each and every one of you. Thank you for all of those who tuned in. And we hope that we will see you all again, and that we imparted something, even if it's one little nugget of an insight, and that we filled you up for this morning and gave you fuel for the rest of the witty day. Thank you so much, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy, and your entire panel. This was really a powerful discussion. There's been a lot of great comments in the chat box, so please check them out. This was really great. And I want to introduce our next panel. I do want to mention that this next panel is going to go from 9 to 10 Pacific. And then at the end, we've got a 15-minute stretch break before the third one starts. So please stay for the stretch break too. So our next panel is Facilitating Accessibility, Making the Workplace Work for Everyone. And Deborah Rue is our moderator today. And Deborah is the CEO and founder of Rue Global Impact. So Deborah, welcome to you and your panelists. And I'm going to turn the summit over to you.
Thank you very much. And it was a wonderful, wonderful start to the day. Really enjoyed all the amazing women that were talking on the last panel. These panels give me such great hope for the future. Women, we're gonna do this right. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and hopefully everyone's here. I'm not, hopefully I see we have a Rosemary here, and hopefully that's Rosemary Musacchio. But so the panel is with Suzanne Montgomery. I'm going to start with her. She's the Vice President and Compliance. She's Compliance and Chief Accessibility Officer for AT&T. Suzanne leads a team of professionals responsible for providing compliance services across the AT&T enterprise, including technology development, program management, ethical, cultural programs, training, compliance reviews, sanctions screening, tariff services, and anti-bribery, anti-corruption controls. As AT&T's Chief Accessibility Officer, she's responsible for advocating accessibility inclusion in products, services, and employee resources, as well as accessibility advocacy internally and externally. Her team provides accessible design tools and accessibility expertise to product development and customer interaction teams throughout the company. And her husband reside in Dallas, Texas with our 2 children. So welcome, Suzanne. We also have Rosemary Musacchio, and there's a reason why I'm doing the bios, by the way, instead of just letting everybody introduce themselves, and you'll understand in a few minutes. So Rosemary Musacchio is also a Chief Accessibility Officer, and I'm very blessed that she works for my firm, Rue Global Impact, and she's a writer, an accessibility expert, and a poet. She's the Chief Accessibility Officer for Rue Global Impact. Through her expertise and skills, she's helped companies make their products and services more accessible and marketable to consumers with disabilities. She's also the proud recipient of IAAP's First Community Accessibility Award. She's a writer, a poet, a disability-related accessibility and technology expert, and she has been writing for many, many papers, a lot of different disability-related newspapers, Age Informer, Ageability. For her career, she is also a person with cerebral palsy that is she can verbalize, but she cannot speak. And so we're going to use technology to allow her voice to be heard today. And my third panelist is Jessica Refus, who is a senior accessibility and disability inclusion leader at Microsoft. As the director of strategic partnerships and policies for accessibility Microsoft, she deals with all the engagements with organizations that focus on people with disabilities and accessibility. Jessica is also an attorney who, before joining Microsoft, promoted the principles of equal opportunity and affirmative action at Starbucks Coffee. Jessica began her legal career in government, including her work as an administrative judge for the U.S. Employment Opportunity Commission. She earned her degrees in Spanish and art history from the University of Washington and a law degree from the Seattle University School of Law. She has muscular dystrophy and uses a power wheelchair, and she and her husband live in Seattle with her 2 sons, a mini Australian Shepherd dog, and a chicken. I actually happen to have 11 chickens at my house, but that's a whole nother topic. So welcome. I see Rosemary is on, and I see Suzanne and Jessica. Cool. Just going through real quick. So, and excuse me for talking so fast. I just wanted to make sure that you knew who these amazing women were. I am Deborah Rue. I am the I'm not a chief accessibility officer. I'm a CEO and the founder of Rue Global Impact. And as Jessica said, us chicken people have to stick together. So thank you so much. We're so excited about this panel. There are not a lot of chief accessibility officers in the world. There's only a handful. And I think it's so cool that these really talented women, are coming together to talk about this very, very important topic. During COVID-19, when everybody was sent home to stay safe, I think a lot of people realized how important accessibility of technology is to all of us. Connectivity is critical. Technology is wonderful, but you have to have the connectivity to really utilize it. And then those of us in the community of people with disabilities, technology is just a game changer for us. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So what I'm going to do is a round robin, and I'm going to ask a question, and then these talented women are going to answer them, and how we're going to do it with Rosemary. Rosemary, before we did this, she put all of her questions in her augmented communications device, and then she's going to control it. And just in case technology doesn't want to behave today, I have a backup on my phone, and I'm going to back Rosemary up, because Rosemary does not communicate in the traditional way, but she's a brilliant woman with a lot to say. I always call her, she's an Italian, so she's got a whole bunch of things to say. And Suzanne and Jessica are amazing women too. So Suzanne, let's start with you. How does an accessible work culture that truly embraces disability inclusion promote creativity and productivity in a business?
Right. Thank you, Deborah. And I'm very, very excited to be here today. Just do a little side note. I was so flattered to receive the invitation to speak with you all today. Like Jessica, I'm a lawyer by education, but I'm raising a 12-year-old young coder. So really excited to know that there's an organization on women in technology and all the barriers you all are breaking, because my daughter's coming. And she'll need an organization like this as she enters the workforce in about 10 years. So thank you for everything you do in this fabulous organization. In terms of an accessible work culture, you start with a people first philosophy. I know there's a number of stakeholders that businesses serve. You serve your customers, you serve your shareholders, you serve your government representatives, but at the end of the day, everything starts with your people and the human capital that you have in your business. And you, as a business, you want to enable all of your employees to bring their best selves to work and to contribute the best that they can to their personal goals and the goals of your business. And doing that in an accessible and inclusive way enables all of your employees to have success. Accessible design isn't special. Accessible design is just usable design. Having the tools that you give your employees to be easy to use and available to everybody benefits every employee. A simple explanation, closed captioning started as something used for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, but it benefits so many other of your employees as well. Perhaps you have employees who don't speak English as a first language, or somebody with a cognitive processing disability or learning difference. Some people learn through visual versus auditory, just a different learning style. So that one little change in how you handle meetings benefits all of your employees. And when you think about everything, if you think about your company and how you provide your tools and your services and your employee interactions with, am I enabling this employee to bring them their best selves to work and to be positioned for success in all that you do? It allows your employees to be the most creative and be the most productive. They're not worried about, how can I get my job done? How can I communicate with my boss if they're auditory but I'm not? And that you just take that hurdle away and enable them to be productive. And that's what you're paying for, right? You're paying for that talent on your team and to deliver on results. And then just from a cultural standpoint, and we've all learned this in the last 9 months, agility is key. So having that flexibility and having a culture of agility within your company truly enables everybody to bring their success. If you have barriers, then people just simply can't be productive. Barriers of any kind, and accessibility and not having accessible tools is just one of many barriers that a company can have.
Well said, Suzanne. And in the chat window, David Lighton said, your daughter is welcome. So they're ready for her. And special thanks certainly to Carolyn, David, and Peggy and the entire Woody team. They're impressive pulling this off at the, going from a in-person conference to a virtual conference so effectively. So bravo. And great points. People will say I am a Navy brat, but I'm also an AT&T brat because both of my parents spent their entire career at AT&T. And I was thinking about this the other day. My mom was so proud. My mom's passed over. My mom was so proud that she never took a sick day, and she worked for AT&T for 35 plus years. During COVID, I think she had to have been sick before, put on that mask and go to work. But it's just times have changed so much. And I really appreciate that AT&T is looking at this inclusion and accessibility from the lens of making sure all human beings are included, because that's what this is about. So thank you for your leadership. Suzanne, you're doing amazing work. So let's go to Rosemary. So Rosemary, why do we need chief accessibility officers? And so what I'm going to say, Rosemary is using her assistive technology and her computer, brilliant technologist, and she's now going to initialize the technology so her voice will be heard. Rosemary, if it's misbehaving, I got it on my WhatsApp. We can go to that one. If the technology don't want to behave, we got backup. So I'm going to do that while Rosemary works for the technology in the background. And of course, mine's going to stop too. Wow. So I'm doing it and it's not working. Okay. So Rosemary, you keep trying in the background, and my, for some reason, this, I had this all down anyway. And we'll go ahead to Jessica and Rosemary. I'll let you work on it in the background. I sometimes just technology just don't want to work. So I'm so sorry. So Jessica, let me go to you next, and we'll work on the technology in the background. Microsoft has made accessibility and disability inclusion a priority for many years. Do you mind telling us more about the history? And before you start, Jessica, I'll just say that when my old company, Tech Access, that Rosemary also worked with, and so did Lamondre, who's going to be talking tomorrow, we could not have had that company if Microsoft had made the efforts they'd made with accessibility, because I wouldn't have been able to have the technology that was needed to really support my technologists with disabilities at the time. So we're big fans of Microsoft. So Jessica, over to you, and we're going to work on this technology background and the problems in the background.
Thank you, Deborah. That really is so nice to hear. And I just want to point out that the flexibility that Rosemary and Deborah are demonstrating right now when technology fails us, this is women at work. This is what we are great at, multitasking and adapting to uncertainty. So kudos to the two of you and the folks behind the scenes that are helping. I'm so excited to be here. This feels like such a friendly group of folks that kind of get it. And I love that we're talking about accessibility, and I really want to thank Deborah for the nice things you have to say about Microsoft, but also share that this is a journey. You don't have to have everything perfect. We certainly don't. We are always striving to improve, and there's always work to be done. So you can do it within your organizations. I'll share a little bit about our journey at Microsoft. We have worked on accessibility for a long time. It was in the early 90s when Bill Gates made it a priority to focus on accessibility. I don't know if anyone has ever accidentally leaned on the sticky keys. So you lean on Shift, sticky keys pops up, and you think, what is this all about? How annoying. Oh no, people with mobility disabilities like myself, we love sticky keys. And it was really one of the first examples of Microsoft striving to create some cool new innovation that is accessible to people with disabilities. When Satya Nadella became our CEO in 2014, we looked back at this journey and we realized we had some highs, but we also had some lows. We had some things to work at, moments when we weren't that proud of the products we were releasing to people with disabilities, to our people, to our community. So we listened, we learned, and we worked even harder. And along this journey, one of the things we changed within the company was the definition of disability. So no longer was disability a medical model. There's something wrong with me because I have muscular dystrophy. Rather, we started looking at the World Health Organization's definition of disability, which is a mismatch between the individual and the world around me. Now, this is really important because no longer are people with disabilities the problem, but rather an inaccessible world is the problem, and people with disabilities are the solution. And engineers at Microsoft love looking at problems and finding solutions. And I have to admit that as someone with a disability, it feels pretty good to be part of the solution rather than the problem. Part of this was also expanding how we looked at disability to be, yes, a permanent disability like muscular dystrophy, but also a temporary disability. So maybe you're someone who has a broken arm or has a condition like COVID, or maybe you're someone with a situational limitation. So you're holding a baby while trying to type on your computer and multitask like we're all having to do right now. And when we design products that speak to each of these segments, we're designing products that are better for everyone. And we're doing that with the expertise of people with disabilities. So I think the transition really became, how do we manage accessibility like a business? It's this important. We need to manage it like we would privacy, security. Accessibility is a business segment for Microsoft, and we look across the whole company and assess it through a maturity model. How are we doing? How can we improve? How can we gauge everyone in the process of ensuring an inclusive and accessible experience for our employees and for our customers? And the 4 pillars that I'd encourage you to go back and look at within your own organizations are the people. Let's start with that talent with disabilities, bring them into the company. Take a look at your systems. This is the feedback loops across, excuse me. This is feedback loops with organizations outside of your company that can give you advice. I'm a little blurry right now.
You just cleared up.
There we go. And this is the products that you create. Whatever your product is it accessible to your people? Is it accessible to your customers? And then inventing the future. And lastly, before I turn it back to Deborah, I hope we've got the tech figured out. I should have started with a visual description of myself. So I have blonde hair, I'm wearing red lipstick, I have black glasses and a black shirt on, and I'm here in my home office with a bookshelf with some books and odds and ends on it. I was reminded when I went blurry on my screen that not everyone can see me. Sure, people who are blind and low vision, and hello to my friends out there who might be, but also if you're joining us from the car or if you have low bandwidth, I think that visual description can be something that benefits everybody. So let me turn it back over to Deborah.
Yes, and well said. And I forgot to do this. I've got gray hair and purple hair too. I'm having fun as I'm aging, and have on a black sweater with a whole bunch of little cute buttons on it. Which I enjoy, but we actually have David Perez, our Chief Financial Officer, who has so graciously agreed to be the voice. So David, if you don't mind unmuting yourself, and I'm going to remind the audience that the question to Rosemary was, why do we need Chief Accessibility Officers? And by the way, we appreciate you, David. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deborah. I'm honored to be here today, especially alongside my mentor and friend Deborah and my co-panelists, Suzanne and Jessica. I featured Suzanne's colleague, Jenny LaFleury, Microsoft's Chief Accessibility Officer, CAO, in an article entitled What Being a Chief Accessibility Officer Means. So what does Chief Accessibility Officer, CAO, mean? It means ensuring every aspect of your company is accessible to employees with disabilities and customers with disabilities. It means helping implement best practices and policies to make sure screen reader users can access your website. Persons with dexterity impairments can operate printers and scanners, and employees with hearing impairments can participate fully in conferences. A chief accessibility officer also has to check if digital documents can be read, completed, and/or signed by keyboard and assistive technology (AT) users. Being a CAO doesn't only mean making digital and tangible documents accessible. It is about making attitudes accessible also. You have to convince stakeholders and colleagues that having a disability does not make someone less smarter or less capable. In fact, you have to show that many of us strive to do our best at our jobs. Every business needs to include accessibility in its fabric to become stronger. Otherwise, it will rip and create big gaps. A CAO makes every aspect of a company accessible and inclusive to increase productivity, embrace diversity with common goals, and promote more of a positive image to the public.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. Now y'all see why I've worked with Rosemary so many times. She's just so brilliant. And it's interesting when Rosemary goes about her day, before COVID-19, she's a big traveler, was born in Italy, just loves traveling back to Italy. But a lot of times when people are asking her questions and stuff, they won't talk to Rosemary. They'll speak to whoever her caregiver is. Rosemary's brilliant. And yes, she uses her body differently than some of us, but she wants to make a difference in the world, and she is. And I'm really proud to work with her. So, and special thanks to our male allies, David and Richard, for helping us do that. So thank you so much. So Suzanne, we're going to go back to you. How does a company create that accessible culture? Because there's a lot of moving parts in these gigantic global companies like AT&T. So how do you accomplish this?
Thank you. And absolutely, it's a challenge like any other cultural initiative that a company has to do, because there's competing priorities across the company. So I'll just share with you some things that we found that worked for us to make a meaningful difference at AT&T. I'll go back to my people first comment. You always start with your people. So when we started on our journey here, first I signed an FTE to go full-time employee. Sorry, we talk in acronyms at AT&T, and it's one of my pet peeves, and then I just went and did it. So I apologize. To go research how to do this. And she started by interviewing employees with disabilities, supervisors of employees with disabilities, champions. She partnered with our employee resource group and developed a list of goals. You need deliberate goals. You need soft goals, don't cut it. Rosemary listed a whole bunch of issues that need to be top of mind for business leaders in creating accessible and not even creating, having available accessible and usable tools. And if you're not deliberate, they're just not there. So having deliberate goals is critical. And thinking about culture across the company, an accessibility culture isn't about job accommodations. Job accommodations are important, and it is very important that your businesses and yourselves comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act and the similar laws around the world to make sure that your employees on an individual basis have the tools and resources that they need to be successful in their jobs. But an accessibility culture is about providing a quality place to work that's inclusive for everybody and thinking about things systematically. So have your deliberate goals, have your feedback loop with your employees, engage externally, find out what those best practices are, and continue that process repeatedly. It's not a one and done. It's not a quick and easy. This is, as Jessica said, this is a journey, and it takes some time. But what I found is if you come to a topic like this with an open mind and transparency and communication, you'll get a lot of feedback, and people will put their heart and soul into it.
Well said, Suzanne. And I think sometimes people think, well, why? I don't need accessibility. I don't have, those needs. But the reality is accessibility improves the process for all of us. Technology improves the way we can use the technology. It helps with connectivity issues. There's so many benefits. And Suzanne mentioned a couple of them, things that were technologies that were created for people with disabilities. Everyone is benefiting from them in society. Captions, text to speech, or just a few. There are so many. So it really is important to us to not only focus on what it truly means to be human, understand that most of us want to participate and make the world better, but also humanize technology, make sure technology can work for all of us. So let me go back to Rosemary. And Rosemary said privately that she does want to try to get her assistive technology to work on her own again, but love that we have backups. So Rosemary, why is accessibility important for inclusion in the workforce, education, and in society? I will also tell, as Rosemary's doing this, she's using a head pointer, and it's considered technology that's been around a long time, but she's really good at this technology, so she likes it. She also uses eye gaze, which it tracks her eye movements, and she can work her computer with that as well. She uses combinations of assistive technology to navigate her day. Is it behaving, Rosemary? It is, okay.
We, persons with disabilities, are a vital part of society. 15% of the world's inhabitants have some type of disability. In the United States, 60 million Americans have disabilities. According to our CDC, 1 in 4 American adults identify as having a disability. Our community of persons with disabilities has a discretionary spending of $175 billion. When you include family members and friends of persons with disabilities, the numbers skyrocket to $13 trillion in spending power. These statistics scream power. Businesses can't overlook us. If they do, they'd lose profits. If a business site is not accessible, 71% of us wave bye-bye to it. Their public perception also will be tainted. According to the American Institutes for Research, 92% of customers have a more favorable perception of businesses who hire persons with disabilities. 33% would buy from them than from other companies that don't employ or target us. Companies like AT&T, Microsoft, Google, Huawei, Tommy Hilfiger, Airbnb, and Amazon have seen the light about the inclusion of persons with disabilities by making their products and services more accessible. Tommy Hilfiger, one of the leading clothing designers, has made practice inclusion by using magnetic closures instead of buttons, adjustable pant legs to fit braces, and adjustable sleeves to fit various limb sizes. Airbnb has become more inclusive by adding accessibility filters so travelers with disabilities can find accommodations for rental places. Huawei has created Tech for All and Tech for Good that helps humanize technology for persons with disabilities. Inclusion can also be inverted. In other words, an accessible product can become mainstreamed so everyone can use it, not only persons with disabilities. Take speech recognition, for example. Quadriplegics have been using speech recognition to operate computers. Thanks to Amazon's Alexa and Apple's Siri, using your voice to change a channel or type a text message is just as common as using your fingers. Another example of inverted inclusion is video captions, which is needed for persons who are deaf or hearing impaired to comprehend spoken content. Captions have become useful also for people who mute the audio at night, for example, to avoid waking anybody up. People who don't read English can learn from reading captions on videos or movies. Need we forget the elderly, including my 87-year-old Italian mother who watches Westerns, need captions because they are hard of hearing. Since seniors' discretionary spending is $1.6 trillion, wow. Businesses must cater to the aging population sector also who acquire disabilities. As I already said earlier, we, along with our family and friends, have a lot to spend. If a company remediates its app or website, the return on investment would be 300% of the cost, according to Carl Groves, accessibility guru. An example of a company who has achieved just this is Target. A lawsuit filed by National Federation of Blind (NFB) cost one of the leading store brands in America, Target, $9.7 million in retribution and legal fees. Consequently, not only did Target make their website accessible, it introduced Era, an app that guides customers who are blind and visually impaired around the store. In 2006, when the lawsuit was filed, Target's revenue was $52 billion. In 2019, it jumped to $75 billion. Accessibility and inclusion may have something to do with it. Besides business, education also needs to be accessible and inclusive. Due to COVID-19, many schools are educating children through the internet at home. I have caregivers who are parents or grandparents who complain about homeschooling. They say their children, who don't have disabilities, are not focused, taking frequent bathroom breaks or ask 1,000 questions. Imagine if a child had autism or Down syndrome, for example, and a special education teacher wasn't on the other side of the computer screen, it may be much worse. The child's attention span wouldn't last very long unless online lessons are interactive and engaging. Wait. Doesn't this method work for children without cognitive impairments also? Once again, accessibility is mainstream to the public. It becomes universal design. With many school districts temporarily having classes online, inclusion becomes harder than easier because students and teachers do not interact with each other. Students with disabilities may feel more excluded because they can't participate in activities, such as answering questions or doing projects. They also may lack the assistive technology that they only access at school, such as screen readers, adaptive switches, specialized keyboards, etc. Schools should loan the ATs at home during the pandemic, but they don't. Consequently, learners with disabilities can't complete online lessons at home. Teachers must implement universal design learning (UDO) when they use different methods depending on how a student learns best, for example choosing oral, written, or hand-on testing. Teachers, principals, and school boards also must instill on each level of education the principle that students with disabilities have a right to learn and succeed. That's the principal basis that businesses must adhere to also, that persons with disabilities have a right to work and to succeed. Although we may not be able to walk, talk, or even use our hands, we have the ability to work.
Well said, Rosemary, well said. Jessica, tell us about some new and emerging technologies where people with disabilities have been integral, the design and the development that can support a more inclusive workplace. Thank you.
Well, I love that Rosemary is bringing up the pandemic because I think that's a good place for us to start when we think about what those new technologies are going to do to help us in this new world. I think COVID-19 has really disrupted our lives in so many ways, and it has been particularly acute within the disability community. But it's also an opportunity to push the boundaries of what technology can do now that we're at home. This pandemic is digital. As Rosemary talked about, we've got folks that are working everywhere around the world from home. They're learning from home. And we've got 1 million people with disabilities around the world who are using those technologies. So that creates this opportunity to get it right. And we really, truly need to. Technology has the power to empower us, but it also can disempower us when it's not accessible. But I want to give a few examples of kind of some of my favorite ways that people with disabilities right now are impacting the technologies that I bet many of you are using. And I'll tell the story of my friend Swetha. She is a brilliant engineer who is deaf. She primarily uses captioning and lip reading in meetings. And this is really hard. Lip reading is a tough skill, and Swetha is brilliant at it, but she'll admit that it is very fatiguing. And I'll never forget sitting with Swetha in the hack tent. Okay, so a hack tent is like this big, ginormous tent where we all come together, at least we did before the pandemic, and we ate pizza and loaded up on caffeine, and we worked on projects that hopefully can really change the world. So Swetha's telling me that when she talks to her parents on the phone, she asks them to turn off the lights in the background so she can focus in on her parents' faces. So what came of this idea is the blur feature. So Swetha, someone who has a disability, was so impactful that now many of you are using blur when maybe your laundry is piling up behind you, you're in a bedroom of your kids like I might be, and there are toys and stuffed animals everywhere. And we really have the Swetha and the deaf community to thank for the evolution of this feature. Captioning is something that we've mentioned a lot on this call already. I hope many of you are benefiting from the captioning on the bottom of your screen right now. And it's gone from an innovation by the deaf and hard of hearing community to be a delight for people with disabilities and those without. In fact, the use of captioning within Microsoft Teams has increased 30 times since the beginning of the pandemic. So this tells us that there are more people with disabilities out there than we knew, and that people without disabilities are also using captioning. And this is really just the beginning. I think when we use artificial intelligence, we can really see the impact of combining that technology with people with disabilities and their creativity and innovation to create solutions that are great for everyone. And I think this is where we're headed post-pandemic, to realize that people with disabilities are true innovators. And so we need to make that technology responsibly, accessibly, so that they can continue to impact those innovations once we all get back together.
Thank you, Jessica. That was such beautiful comments. I love the examples you gave. And a lot of times I do want to blur out my background. I have my dog in here, my plants, and every once in a while my husband, who sadly has dementia, but he'll walk by and just stand right behind me. It's like, okay, where's that blur feature? So I think that's such a cool example. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to go back to Suzanne. What advice, Suzanne, do you have for technology leaders who are interested in learning more about accessible and usable design?
I think you need to start asking questions. You need to engage with experts. You've got, I'm going to take myself out of this expert category, but you've got 3 fabulous women in Jessica, Rosemary, and Deborah here, who I know would be willing to meet with you. I am happy to meet with you as well. But ask questions and learn. Get involved with organizations. So whether it be, Deborah mentioned earlier, the IAAP, that's the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, I believe.
Good job.
Get involved with them, or the G3 ICT, which is an initiative out of the United Nations for global inclusivity. There are advocacy organizations at both the national level in the United States and the local level. But talk to people. Don't go. My best advice is don't go about this journey on your own. There are, as I've been on this journey the last couple of years, what I have found is the wealth of expertise is phenomenal, and people do not hesitate to help. I came from a legal background where you keep everything tight and close and you don't share, because we have drilled into us client confidences, and that is so important to providing those services. But in the accessibility world, we need to work it together. So, Microsoft is a huge vendor of AT&T's. They get Teams right. It makes it better for my employees. My kids use, for their virtual school, they're using Teams. Actually, my daughter had to teach me how to use it. But so as they've improved the accessibility tools, it helps my kids in their school as well. I'm a service provider to other companies. So as I get it right, it helps their journey as well. We've had a lot of our business customers reach out to us, not only to challenge us to do better, which, is music to my ears, but also to help us with their journey as well. So my best advice is to don't go at this by yourself, and embrace the wealth of expertise in this community.
Well said, Suzanne. And I appreciate Suzanne and Jessica on this panel with Rosemary, because sometimes things seem too hard. And when I approached Suzanne and Jessica, they were like, we're in. Once again, Whitty was like, of course we want to do that. And I just love all this leadership. So thank you. And thank you for the audience for being so supportive, all these wonderful comments. People with disabilities are everywhere. We're everywhere. And it's not a bad thing. We're not broken. We're here. We're spending money. We're trying to live our lives. We're trying to make a difference. And we're stronger together. So let me go back to Rosemary. And I will let everybody know, we are going to stop on time. We don't want to get everything off schedule. So we've got a good 15 minutes. A couple more questions to these brilliant women. So Rosemary, let's go back to you. What do you wish employers understood about including people with more severe disabilities?
What I just said about the principal basis. That's what I wish businesses would understand about including persons with severe disabilities. Employers must understand that we are smart and skilled, or can become skilled if they provide training. Contrary to stereotypical belief, we have a very low job turnover rate, -20% compared to 120% for persons without disabilities. We don't give up. When we find a job, many of us give whatever it takes to succeed. Once we succeed, we tend to remain at one company, not seeking employment somewhere else. That's job loyalty. Employees with disabilities also do not take off more or are sick more than our non-disabled colleagues. Generally, we keep ourselves healthy so we don't miss work. We do everything possible to prove we can do the job and keep it. If a company still does not want to hire someone with a disability even after being presented with all the information I've presented today, then it loses big time. Besides not having productive and reliable employees, the business may face lawsuits based on the Americans with Disabilities Act, along with legal fees in the thousands. Its public image will also falter. As I gave the 92% statistic earlier, people are more likely to purchase from companies that have a diverse employee pool.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. Such brilliant content coming out. And Rosemary did all this, she prepared her answers, and she's a wonderful writer and blogger too. We'll make sure that we send some links. But Jessica, let's go back to you. As employers, and I know AT&T and Microsoft and many others have been very committed to employing people with disabilities. But as employers continue to embrace remote work, what can technology do to empower people with disabilities in competitive employment? How can employers support employees with disabilities in this dynamic working environment, which we just witnessed right here? Sometimes our technology behaves, sometimes it doesn't. But so Jessica, I know you got your magic wand out to solve all this stuff, but it's over to you.
I wish I had a magic wand. But I think Rosemary's comments are part of it. They're part of the solution. She's really articulated why you all should go out and hire someone with a disability. And what I want to share right now is why now? Why is it so important that we do that now? And then also here are some things to think about when an organization is going to do that in this new work from home era that we're in. So we understand that people with disabilities are an asset to the company, but we also need to recognize that it's just not happening. The unemployment rate for people with disabilities is twice that of the national average here in the US. It has not marginally changed since the promulgation of the ADA 30 years ago. And so we got to ask why. I think the problem is also exacerbating now with COVID. We know that people are going to come out of COVID with more disability representation than we had before. First, there's an estimated 1% to 2% of folks who get COVID then acquire a permanent disability after the virus is long gone. Secondly, and indirectly, COVID is increasing the instances of disability, such as mental health conditions. And we haven't talked about this enough today. I wish we had more time because the stress, anxiety, depression, this is real, folks. People are experiencing this. People with a history of mental health conditions are brilliant at sharing with those of us who have never experienced this. What are ways that we can help to manage these types of stresses? We also see that 1 in 5 people with disabilities have lost their jobs since the beginning of the pandemic, compared to 1 in 7. That's nearly 1 million jobs within the disability community that are lost. That's huge. Okay, so that's scary. I know that. But here's the opportunity. Some of the really great unintended consequences are this chiseling away of the stigma that exists. So for me, I know you all can't see my wheelchair at this camera angle, but that on one hand takes away the first impression that you have of me. On the other hand, it's really critical for people with disabilities continue to share that disability is a strength and recognize that 70% of disability is non-apparent. I'm sure folks on this call right now have disabilities that are non-visual, non-apparent. And most of the time when you're talking to someone on the other side of the camera, you can't see that disability. So we have the responsibility as technologists, and we talked about this, to build technologies that are really inclusive for everyone. And let's look at what's already in there, what's already in that mainstream technology that can help employees at home. So first, Immersive Reader. So this is a tool that's built in across the Microsoft suite. Folks with learning disabilities, dysgraphia, dyslexia have been really integral in creating this tool. And it's basically a suite of tools. So you've got highlighting parts of speech, text-to-speech, picture dictionary. I don't have a learning disability, but I use Immersive Reader every day because Read Aloud helps me get through some really dense, sometimes boring content. I see Suzanne smirking. Maybe she's got some documents she reads that aren't that riveting. And Immersive Reader really helps me improve my reading comprehension. Again, it's showing up in the data too. 560% increase in Immersive Reader since the beginning of the pandemic. People need this data. Right now is the time to create it. They need this technology. And it shows us, to Rosemary's point, people with disabilities, hiring people with disabilities is the right thing to do. But it's also a business imperative. These are big numbers. Accessible products and accessible environments are really an essential building block to become an employer of choice. If you want to keep your employees around, keep that turnover low, then create an accessible experience. Bring in those people with disabilities, and you're going to see a real benefit within the company.
Well said, Jessica. I know we have 6 minutes left, and a couple of questions have been asked to Rosemary, and I'm actually going to have the where I'm just going to answer one of the questions. Chris had asked, Rosemary, you emphasize the intersectionality of the return on investment for business and accessibility. What are the barriers to entry for experts in disability product design who also identify as disabled or differently abled? And I'm just going to answer that question for Rosemary. But Rosemary, also, someone asked a really good question. Can you help us build our resilient muscles, our resilience muscles? So if you want to type in your answer in the chat, it's a little bit more difficult for her to answer the question verbally and get it in there. And, but a lot of it is just people being very confused about what people with disabilities can do. I find it's really sad. We hear this over and over, that people with more severe disabilities, disabilities that can be seen, very visible disabilities. Rosemary, for example, using you as an example, being nonverbal, doesn't mean that she doesn't think and that she can't add wonderful value. Our clients love working with Rosemary. She's brilliant. The community loves working with her. That's why she won the first community award for her contributions. But a lot of it is just, it's ignorance. It's people assuming that it would be too hard to include someone like Rosemary in your workforce. Jessica's in a wheelchair. Well, maybe our bathrooms aren't accessible. So we're just not going to take a chance on hiring somebody as brilliant as Jessica because she's in a wheelchair. It's a lot of it is just misinformation and people being afraid. It's people being afraid and not wanting to make the efforts to really truly include people that want to be included. They want to contribute. And so I think, Elise had made a comment. I love Elise Hart's name. I was saying that yesterday, but it sounds like a stage name. But she was saying, gives us so much empathy. I'm putting on my hearing aids as you're speaking. And the reality is it really does make us all, we all need to just appreciate our differences a little bit more. And I know we have 4 minutes before we need to go to the next panel, but let me ask Suzanne, Jessica, and Rosemary, if you can type in your comments, if y'all want to make any final remarks before we go. Another participant asked if this panel was going to be available to be watched later, because she wants to show it to her family, which touched my heart. But I believe all of these are going to be available later to be viewed. But I really felt this particular panel was one of the most important panels that is being seen anywhere today, because it shows what we're capable of. So Jessica, since you're on my screen, why don't you start, and I'll turn it over to Suzanne after you, and Rosemary, if you don't mind giving us your final comments in the chat window, that would be beautiful.
Well, as we wrap up, is it fair if I give people some homework? Here's some things to do. So I would hate to miss out on the opportunity to not empower this group of women and male allies to go forth and make the world more accessible. So let me give you 3 things. Grab a pen, jot this down. Number 1, ask away. So we need to listen, learn, and amplify the voices of people with disabilities. Ask early, ask often if there's anything that you can do to create a more inclusive workplace, to create a more inclusive community. This could be employees, whether or not they need an accommodation, but it could also be something as simple as, what can I do to make you more comfortable in this space? Number 2 is model the way. We're all responsible for demonstrating inclusive and accessible best practices. So before your meetings, send out materials in advance. People who use screen readers who are blind will absolutely appreciate having a chance to consume that content before the meeting, but it also makes you look like you're on your A game. So it's great for your career development as well. Turn on captioning in PowerPoint, say your name before speaking, give a visual description like we did earlier, but modeling these best practices and building them in to become micro habits of accessibility for all that you do. And number 3, hire someone with a disability. When you have the opportunity to do so, reflect back on Rosemary and think about what an incredible employee she is. Think about what a brilliant technologist she is. And before you make that final hiring decision, ask if you've cast that net broadly enough to include people with disabilities. because when you hire someone with a disability and into your company, into your team, you too will learn that disability is a strength.
Ooh, well said, well said. Suzanne?
Thank you. I don't know that I can add much to what Jessica said, but a couple of thoughts, and I'll start with where I started my discussion and begin with everything that you do begin with a people first mentality and the enablement of employees to bring their whole selves to work, and for your customers to have the whole experience of the product and service that you're selling. So if there's any barriers that prevent anybody from enjoying your products and services or being a productive employee, that's where you focus your efforts. And then I'll encourage all of you, whatever stage of your career that you're at, as you grow in your career, make sure you're bringing up those who are coming after you. I love this organization and what you're doing for women in tech. Be inclusive of that intersectionality of women in tech with disabilities or other areas of diversity. And as you are growing your career, bring others up along with you. I know there was a lot of talk in the last panel about mentorship and about leading the way. Please don't ever lose that message and that focus. It's so important for all of us and those that we're breaking barriers for.
Well said, well said. And the last comment we'll give to Miss Rosemary. Rosemary said, as technology advances, persons with disabilities will become more independent and stronger. We'll be able to receive education and gain employment with less barriers. Don't give up on what you want to do with your life. Well said, Rosemary. So thank you to my wonderful panelists, Suzanne, Rosemary, Jessica. What amazing women. And special thanks to Whitty. Thank you, Whitty, for caring about this topic. Thank you for Carolyn, David, Peggy, and this amazing team of Whitty. I'm just really honored and thrilled to have been part of this. So thank you. Thank you, Suzanne, Jessica, and Rosemary. And thank you, David, for helping us.
Deborah, thank you. And thank you to all of your panelists. This was an absolutely amazing discussion. And I want to point people to Terrence Davis actually put a link in the chat box where you'll be able to find the recording. This is going to YouTube also, and they're being recorded there. All of the information for the recordings we'll be giving to y'all, but I just wanted to point you to that if you want somebody to come back and be able to listen, because this was such a powerful session. Thank you. And is Elise here for our stretch break? There she is. Welcome, Elise. Elise is going to give us an energy stretch break, and then we'll come back with our third panel. So Elise, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. And how wonderful it has been to be with all of you. It's like just fed my soul. So my name is Elise Hart, and what I learned from the earlier presentation is I am wearing black, and I am short, and I have hearing aids, so I feel very liberated here. Anyway, we are going to do a practice, a Qigong practice. It may be something that you have never heard of. We do gentle movements and breath. And I have my trusty chair here. So anything we're doing, I'm going to sit down and we'll stand up, and you'll see me doing both, but you decide what's appropriate for your body right now. We're going to change the tempo and go a little bit slower, and we're going to bring in some vitamin O for oxygen for our brain. And this way you'll take in more information later on. So again, I'm going to be here, or we can stand. This is called spinal cord breathing. And we're going to take our hands like cactus arms. We're going to roll them in the shoulder girdle and lean back just a little bit, arching the back. Look up. And then you're going to bring your elbows or your wrists together and exhale, coming down. Now I'm feeling the back body and each vertebra, but the most important thing is that stretch in the chest right now. And that nice, long, slow, deep breath, imagining exhaling down We're only going to do this a couple more times. Imagine that you're bringing in pristine breath, and we're exhaling anything gray, dark, heavy. And inhale. And exhale. And I'm going to put this aside. I'm going to do the last two standing, just so you can see. We're going to do a little bit of knocking on the body right now, starting at our sternum, heading down into the up and down from the throat to the heart, just awakening the body. Sometimes we sit a long time. So we're breaking up any stagnation. We're getting the fluid body moving. And now we're coming up on the outside of the arm with a curved arm, or you can do a light fist. And we're going to do this one more time. And then we're going over to the other side. Right now, I'm looking like Tarzan or Jane. But I'm going over my emotional center, and I'm coming down. Just checking over there, see if there are any messages. But now coming back to my body, we're coming out of our head. And this really helps us focus our energy too. We're tapping down the belly button, over to the hips. And now we're going to the back. And if it's available to you, I want you to just tap the backs of the thighs. You can come down to wherever. And if you're seated, you can do the same. And you're coming up on the inside of the thighs, the groin. We're going to do 2 more dives down, exhaling and inhaling. Feel really good. And now I want to see what kind of rhythm you have. We're just going to be going for 5 more minutes. This is just a little taste treat. But take your fists and you're going to knock on your hip bones. And I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm going to show you something fun. So bend, straighten, bend, straighten. 2 more. And now bring those palms away from the hip bones. And you might feel a little tingling. And come on down. Now we're going to give it a shake. So we're going to do a bounce and a shake. Again, just making sure that our energy system is tip top, that we don't have any stuck points, less of them. And taking the palms up, down, out, and give a shake. And now bring the arms to a peaceful pose. And again, notice if you don't feel a change in the temperature in your hands or a little tingle. Nice big exhale. Now, so many of us have neck situations. So we're going to just do a very efficient neck, shoulder, hip movement. It's almost like a sprinkler. It's very intentional. So we're going to start with our hips, and we're going to move hips, waist, shoulders, and then look over the shoulder and come on back. Again, very firmly planted feet, hips width apart, and I'm breathing in as I go back, and then I'm coming quicker forward. So again, we're just going to do 1 more on each side. Hips, waist, shoulders, look over, come on back. Now that you've got that, 1 more. Hips, waist, shoulders, look back, come on back. Hips, waist, Shoulders look back. Come on, back. And now last but not least, we have 2 more body parts that we have not moved. We're going to take our hands, interlace them, and we're just going to roll the hands forward. And roll the hands back. Very good. And now you're going to take them apart, and we're just going to roll one hand over the other. Involve your shoulders, but don't bring them up to your ears. Very nice. And then last but not least, I think we have 1 more minute to be mindful of time. Just move as if you were inside of a hula hoop. Nice circle with the hips. Again, feet firmly on the ground and the other direction. Very nice. And now we're going to pull this down, like opening your arms, bringing in the sunshine, and then just bring the palms towards you. Easy, open, receptive, allowing in and accepting all the information and the relationships and the wonderful things that you're going to pick up here. And one last. Beautiful, hands over the belly button. Just give it a stir. Take a second or 2 just to bring the arms down. You can be seated, you can be standing. Notice if your body doesn't feel a little more lit up. Your mind a little quieter but alert. So I will be back at 2 o'clock Pacific time to 2:15 this afternoon. It looks like I actually have a few more minutes. And then tomorrow at lunch, there'll be a 30-minute class. And so any questions that you have while we sit here? Oh, thank you. Thank you. So just take a sec. One last piece. Your mood goes where your mouth goes. So bring up the corners of your mouth in a Mona Lisa smile. Close your eyes just for a sec, knowing everybody else is here doing the same. And just feel the influence that that has on your physicality. And breathe knowing that within just a few minutes' time, you can always change what's going on inside of you, no matter what's going on outside. So I thank you, Carolyn Layton, Anna, Daniel, everyone. And yes. Okay, so adapting for people with all kinds of abilities. Seated practices will be very helpful. I have had experience with seniors who have cognitive challenges sometimes, and also physicality, you know, a lot of stiffness. And so frozen shoulders, parts that aren't moving. The beautiful part of Qigong is really, it's mind, imagination, and breath. And we can do that anywhere. It really doesn't matter the size of the movements, it's the intention of the movements. So for example, one person that I had worked with for a long time had been in an accident and had no use of her arm. And a lot of the movements are with 2 sides. So she used one arm fully, doing beautiful circles, and the others acute her for very small. And she was able to imagine, and your neurology gets the same message, you know, your body does. And it just balances you, makes you feel better. Hope that that answers the question. Thank you. Anybody else? Comments, questions, anything you felt or noticed? Oh, you're welcome, you're welcome, you're welcome. Much needed. Thank you. You're so welcome. You know what? We often bring our heads to work only, and we don't bring all of this. And so one of the through threads of this whole conference are also about mental health. And this also helps with that. So I'll see you later on it too.
Elise, thank you so much. This was awesome. I just wanted to mention, once again, I did it sitting, but when you did the shaking, it made me start yawning. I wasn't yawning before, but I noticed that the yawning made me take deeper breaths and I now feel more alive. So that was pretty amazing. Thank you.
You know, shaking is, there's so little time and I'm wordy. Hi there. But one of the quick things is, every animal shakes, right? And then the athletes at the Olympics, every time they're going to go in to the pool, right? So it really discharges. We don't often know all the stress we carry, and that always reveals something. And the yawn is so good. It just meant more oxygen. So thank you. You're the reason I'm here.
Thank you so much. I just want to draw everybody's attention to Whitty's Wellbeing Center. You can go onto Whitty.com and click on that. We have opportunities almost every day of the week for you to experience Elise and some of our other amazing presenters. So please do check that out. So I think we're coming up on our next session. I just want to make sure that my presenters are here. I see Michelle. Great.
Good morning.
Good morning. Is Renee here? Yes, Renee is here too. Awesome. So we have our next keynote panel discussion, which is COVID-19's devastating impact on gender parity in tech. And we have Michelle Bailey with us. She's the moderator. And Michelle is Group Vice President, General Manager, and Research Fellow at IDC. And she's also a Whitty Advisory Board member. And we also have Renee Redwood with us, and Renee is CEO of Redwood Enterprises. So I'm going to turn things over to both of you ladies. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to start by trying to share my screen here. I'm delighted to be back and to also be speaking with Renee and with Karen this morning. We had a session earlier as we were getting ready for this session to talk through what we have seen as some of the challenges, particularly for women in the technology space, as we've moved through what is just universally the most loathed year in the history of all mankind, I have to believe. And of course, for all of us recently, we've learned that we're going to be in this for a while longer yet. I know that there's been a lot of positivity around the vaccine development for sure. But we're still preparing, I think, for being in this state of quarantine and in and out of more physical workspaces for probably the next 6 months, on top of what's already been, a 9-month period. So it's been pretty draining for a lot of people. What we're starting to hear more about is how this is impacting women, particularly in the technology space, and what it may mean for their longer term career growth. And are you able to see my slides? I'm wondering if somebody can give me the nod, if you can see the slides on my screen. Great. So what you're looking at here is some research that we did. It was actually back in June, and it was a survey of Whitty members. And we had about 650 or so members that we did a 15, 20-minute survey with them. And it was both men and women. And we asked them what has been the major impacts to their jobs or working conditions as a result of COVID. And not surprisingly, everybody universally felt that the major impact had been work from home. And I will say we've been in a bit of a bubble with tech. We are in one of those industries where we're not necessarily on the front line. And a lot of our jobs were able to shift to a home work environment. But what was very interesting to me was how differently everything else was experienced by men and women. And you can see for women, the distractions and diversions from responsibilities that were at home were much greater than they were for men. Women felt a lot more insecure about their job than men did, and being able to, I believe, not just keep their job, but also maintain their performance at their job. Women were working significantly longer hours and overtime, and felt that they had a heavier workload than they had pre-COVID. And women were also, I think, dealing more with new business processes that their company was instituting. We definitely did see that than what we saw with men. Men, on the other hand, had a lot more concerns around their health, being less productive at work, taking a cut in their pay, having to learn new tools. So I think this is, again, more proof points that men and women experience things very differently at work, and they've experienced what's happened with COVID very differently as well. And then when you look at how long everybody thought it would take to return to normal, and again, this was taken back in June, women thought it was going to take at least another year to return to normal, and men were thinking more about 8 months. So from what we're seeing, it probably will be more like June before we are back to more of a normal phase here. And then 13% of women felt like things would never get back to normal, right? That these are somehow systemic changes that had taken place in their job, and that they would be there to stay. One of the things that I thought was very interesting was this, and we looked at how before COVID, how men and women spent their time in terms of contact as part of their job. You can see that men had more trusted or lower contact groups that they did work with, whereas women were much more out in the public domain and had much broader contact with coworkers or the public than what men thought they were. And then when we took this pulse in June and we asked, okay, well, this is what your contact looked like before COVID, what does it look like now? You can see that disproportionately women described everything pretty much being zero contact from a work setting, that they were almost exclusively work from home and did most of their job via phone or video, and men had either zero contact or some kind of low level contact where they're able to occasionally get out and have some in-person contact. So again, when I look at this, it really speaks to me about just how much responsibility there is for women at home, and then that translates into their job as well, that they felt that they were in a place where they really were not able to get outside their online sphere. And then when we ask everybody where they want things to be once this is over, you can see that women want a much more balanced approach to what their contact looks like as a part of their job. In fact, it starts to look a lot more like what men were doing before COVID. And when you ask men the same question, again, they start to look much more like where they were pre-COVID in terms of their contact with others, but they're looking for even less wide open context. And men and women start to look almost the same in terms of the way they want to think about contact as part of their job. So it tells us a lot of things. It tells us just how quickly women's jobs have had to change on a dime. It shows something else that we've seen consistently in our research, is in that women and men actually want pretty similar things from their job going forward. And this could actually be a level set in the way everybody thinks about what their day-to-day business processes and practices look like. One of the concerns that we have is that women, we've had this for a long time, that women are not working in technology fields in the same way that they are in other industries like healthcare, for example. And one of the major concerns has been that with COVID, that women either opt out or they take a back seat just because of all the stress and pressure they've been under in balancing what had been just primarily a home environment with now a combined work and home environment. And you can see in here how that's really devastating from an economic standpoint. If we start to think about women backing off from the technology sector relative to where things have been, we know today that about 90% of all US employees work in services-based industries. And of course, tech is moving very, very quickly over to services from a product-centric point of view. And so if you start to think about 50% of your worker population dialing back, taking lower end jobs, maybe even leaving the workforce, that has devastating impacts on GDP for the US. And it means that a very large, and frankly, what's been a growing contingent of more diverse employees starts to become a real issue in terms of having enough workers to do the job. And we've known for a long time that economic growth has been increasingly tied to a human workforce. Even with all of the advancements we're seeing around robotics and automation, services-based industries are still primarily driven by people. And one of the things that's also been really critical as we've looked back and are looking forward at what the impact on the economy is productivity. So what you're seeing here is changes in productivity based on either agriculture, manufacturing, or services. And you can see that agriculture or farming, it's pretty much automated now, right? You don't go to a farm without seeing large automated tractors and automated climate control policies and things like that. Manufacturing's also undergone a huge level of automation with robotics. But what we haven't seen is the increase in productivity around services business, which is, of course, what the tech market is right now. And that's because you need people to get the jobs done. And, you know, this is really the promise of AI and being able to think about greater automation in the workforce. But right now, if we start to lose large parts of our worker population where we've made pretty good advancements, it's going to be devastating to the US economy. And this is really why the government's going to pay a lot of attention to this over the next couple of years, and why we've seen so much money, frankly, being pumped into the economy to keep businesses moving. So something else that we talk a lot about on these sessions, and you've probably heard me talk about it before, is what is the business problem of having a lack of diversity? And the number one problem is you're just not getting enough new business ideas, and women particularly see that. So if you've got the same management in place, the same worker pool in place, they all look and act the same, they all think the same way, they're usually going to just churn out the same thing year after year. Whereas we know if you bring a more diverse team in charge and you bring them to the decision-making table, that it does spawn new ideas for the business and new innovation and new ways of thinking about delivering products and services. And then, you know, this other challenge that we've had for quite a while is having the proper job candidates and having enough people to do the work. So that's really a pretty dire economic circumstance if we think about the impacts from COVID sending us backwards from a recruiting perspective with women and certainly minorities, and thinking about other more diverse candidates as part of the workforce. When we did our last study back in August of this year, this is a separate study that we did, we asked all employees, men and women, to think about what was important as part of their overall career, and then where they'd like to see more improvement with their current job. And the things that you're seeing in the upper right-hand quadrant are things that we see all the time. I'm worried about my pay. Work-life balance has actually always been one of those top predictors of satisfaction for workers. Skills, I want to learn new skills. I want to work in a place where I've got an opportunity for career advancement. But what you're seeing circled in the red is brand new, and we haven't seen this before. And of course, this was August, so we're right in the heart of COVID. Employees now want to work for an ethical company, so a company that puts ethics above necessarily economics. They're looking for stability and security, right? We all feel that right now, that you're looking for a job where you can feel that you are going to have a job going forward and that the work environment is stable. But safety was right up there as well. This whole new notion around safety and what that could mean: physical safety, emotional safety, safety in terms of your family and being able to support your family. So this is a very, very new set of parameters that we're going to see that future workforce look for. And I think it's going to be one of those things that result from COVID that we hadn't anticipated, but it's going to be a longer term systemic change. And I had presented some of this earlier in June when we had our session. And back in 2019, we were able to cluster all the different types of women who work in technology. And we could see here that there's 9 distinct personas or types of women who work in the technology sector, with the number one group being this group of women that I would describe as involved in personal development. So we're very much focused on how do they get to the next phase in their career? How do they learn skills? How do they feel that they're making a difference on a day-to-day basis? And really working through developing themselves personally as part of their career. And then you see other things that you'll probably recognize, like those looking towards retirement, those looking for health and well-being, those looking for happiness. Those are the more focused on close personal relationships and family care and faith and spirituality. But then take a look and see what happened in 2020. So when we got through to COVID, number 1 was health and well-being, number 2, faith and spirituality, and then close relationships, wealth, happiness, family care, financial independence, and retirement. So what's missing here? The missing piece is personal development. Everybody just kind of let that go for the sake of protecting yourself physically and your family as well. So I think that's another really great indicator of just how different businesses will have to operate going forward, and more importantly, how they have to meet employees where they are in their life. And for some people right now, we know you have small children, they're at home, you're educating them at home, that's more important. You have elderly relatives, that's more important for you right now. Your own physical health is more important. So that's what we're going to talk about on the session today. So I'm joined by Renee and by Karen. Hi, ladies. We can't hear you.
Hello, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Good, thank you.
Good. I'm going to blow this back up so that you can see it. So I'm going to have you introduce yourselves. Karen, why don't you go ahead, because I don't think we're quite as familiar with you. Why don't you go ahead first?
Sure. Hi, my name's Karen Cohn, and I come from the corporate world, so I can bring a bit of that perspective. Most recently from Microsoft, but also from IBM, MasterCard, and Gartner. But currently, I work as I'm a venture partner with a fund called Masters Fund, and we focus on women entrepreneurs and funding women entrepreneurs who, as you may know, only get 2 to 3% of the VC funding. And I also serve on the advisory board of multiple early stage growth companies in tech, including in AI, financial crime, in fintech and compliance, and quite a few other areas. So that's me, Michelle.
It's great to see you again, Karen. I look forward to seeing you again in person soon, I hope.
Yes, I hope so too.
And Renee, will you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm delighted to be here. I'm Renee Redwood, and I am pleased to be able to be part of this discussion on the impact of COVID on women in the workforce. I have a consulting practice. I'm the CEO of Redwood Enterprise. We do a lot of work around workplace culture and institutional change, disproportionately looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, metrics, and mechanisms of accountability. And I am affiliated with WITI after having connected when I was the head of the Presidential Glass Ceiling Commission, the Civil Rights Act of 1991. Let me just say, Michelle and Karen and others, if we go back and look at those basic recommendations that WITI had suggested institutions follow, we would be addressing issues such as racial justice in the workplace. We would be addressing issues such as equity in the workplace. We would be looking at leadership and preparation for leadership in the workplace. We'd be looking at the role of the public sector as well as the private sector. So delighted to be part of this ongoing conversation on how do we break these glass ceilings, and now a new one, COVID, what it means.
Most definitely. I'm gonna get out of here and see if I can stop sharing my screen. I'm having a little bit of trouble here. I don't know if someone can help me. Oh, there it is. So great. So let me get started with both of you. What are you hearing from women who are working in the tech sector now that they're working from home? They have children at home. Maybe they've got an elderly parent at home. They've got other family members that they're dealing with. What is that impact that we're hearing on their jobs? And what are some of the challenges that you're both hearing that you think are going to be a problem for us going forward? Karen, would you like to get started first? I don't know if you want to chime in first
Sure.
here.
Well, the impact right now is enormous. I think in the spring, when we first started having some of the work at home, kids at home situation, people said, oh, at least from the young people, from what I hear, are saying that I can deal with this. It's only a few months, but it's gone on now. And so taking care of kids, helping them educate at home, in many cases, it's also elder care and all the cooking and cleaning. And the thing is that we used to be able to get more help, whether it was somebody coming in the home or childcare, but now due to the pandemic, that help isn't existing. So what I'm seeing is a lot of women in particular, and I understand that men also are involved, but predominantly women who are currently exhausted from trying to juggle everything, and the impact of that on their work decisions is serious, because there is a fear that says there's a question of whether it's worth it. And I'll just add, one more thing. I think we've all seen, studies have shown that corporations who are in the top quartile for gender diversity have 25% more likely chance of achieving higher profitability and being successful. So you start seeing women pulling back and saying it's not worth it. The impact on the success of corporations is very key, as well as what you mentioned, Michelle, of what is the impact in terms of women who are predominant in many of the service industries. So there's a job loss issue, but there's also profitability, and I can share with you how that affects entrepreneurs as well.
I would love to hear more about that. Renee, what are you hearing? Are you hearing that there is this level of exhaustion where you're concerned that women are going to opt out? You think about all the challenges that there have been, particularly in the tech sector over the last 20 years, really, of increasing participation of women and certainly driving more diversity around race here in the US. What do you think is happening right now?
I think a couple of things. I like the fact how Karen talked about 9 months. So anybody with children knows what 9 months is. Okay. So what were we birthing over this time? It becomes the question at the table. What does that then mean? Part of it is this expectation that of the unknowing, of how long this is going to continue, right? The vaccine recognizes a moment of hope that something different can change. Also, the recognition of leadership change and how we address it. So that gives people a bit of a breath of relief, but a breath, you can't last long on a breath. The next question becomes, what do we need to see happen? And I don't think it's just consistent with women in tech. I don't have any data specific to women in tech. I know you all do. I work with a host of other institutions and look at overall general public data. And one of the things that's very clear in what, I see in this research, even, and I'm sorry you took the slide down, but even when we talk about the return to normal, part of the exhaustion is folks don't know what normal looks like, is what we're hearing. What should we expect, right? How are we going to proceed? What does it mean for me to be able to go back to so-called normal when my children are home from school and I'm not sure when the schools are going to open? So normal at that point doesn't mean anything, even if I could go back to work. Normal doesn't mean, so part of this is helping folks to find clarifying expectations for what workplaces can be. And so it presents us with an opportunity at this time to start to define what is needed in order for people to feel and be productive, which does not include exhaustion.
I love how you talk about the uncertainty, right? That's exhausting in itself. You prepare for something, you expect to change in 12 weeks, that change doesn't come, it gets pushed out, it's another 12 weeks, and you're putting Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids, and that is, it's not a positive human behavior. And at the same time, it's very, very different from businesses, right? When you think about the way businesses run, they're very programmatic. They're usually on an annual calendar. This happens in Q1, this happens in Q2, and you're expected to kind of continue on that journey with the corporation's calendar and schedule, while at the same time, everything in your own personal life is unpredictable. You can't plan for things. So is there...
Let me just say one other thing. These institutional schedules are also becoming more flexible because many of the institutions I'm working with, expectations of what, sure, you have to have your annual meeting, I was just looking at the chat, and thank you, Allison, who's done a lot of work on this area on reinventing institutions and rethinking normal. And I do think that's part of what do we expect and what do we want to create the new normal, to create the new norm. And I do think until we can, I think that's part of what we have to do as part of the strategy for getting to a different place where women are valued, a caring economy rubric. And it's not just, I would just say one more thing, it's just not parenting, and it's caregivers, because caregivers are coming in a host of ways consequent to COVID. And what kind of systems and
it's all
structures.
kinds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you a lot, Renee. I want to just pick up on your point about action and the importance of taking action now and speaking up now, because my concern is that a lot of women are going to say, I am forced to prioritize my family. My elderly parents can't wait. My children can't wait. I have no choice. My fear is that it will create, without realization, some systemic issues, meaning some unspoken biases, where employers are going to start to worry, can I really count on these women when the going gets tough? Or will they prioritize? They won't say it because we all know it's illegal. But if women are backing off, what's the impact on promotions? What's the impact going forward? So the need to take action to say, here's how we have to make this work, I think is very critical.
Some of the things that I've seen with some of the larger tech vendors that we do work with is they have made pretty large adjustments to family leave policy. So IBM, for example, I know they made a pretty big change where I think if you need 2 months off, you can take that 2 months. You don't really have to explain it, but that is there for you as an option. We've seen more sick days. I think some of the larger cloud companies have instituted 30 days annual sick leave instead of the usual, whatever it is, 5 or 6 days. I do think that there have been, and obviously work from home, right? That's been one of those new policies that's instituted, or else no business would be getting done right now. So I do think that corporations do have teams in place where they recognize that some of these institutional changes need to be made right now. One of the questions I have for the both of you is, do you think that that is something that is going to be ongoing? So is there an ability to drive and create what that new normal looks like? And how do you take that action when you are exhausted, right? You're just barely being able to get through. I'd love some thoughts from both of you on what can women do to make their voice heard and really help drive through some of those changes within their organization, maybe within their communities, or even within their local town processes, or the local states level around with your local politicians. Like, any thoughts that you have there?
Well, there's a host of key actors that need, or listeners, hopefully, that need to have conversation with, and understanding, again, the lifting of the voice and identifying what most comfortable for you. Is it dealing with your employer? Then identifying what are those things that you do need. You just said that we work from home since home is now work, okay? So if home is now work, what do I need structurally? Not everyone has appropriate physical structure within their home, but could indeed get enhancements. We should not assume that everyone in the sector or in the workforce has access to the lighting that they need in order to be able to do the work, or that they have the bandwidth within their home to be able to have the connectivity. So if we want to start with just physical structural, then that whole area of what is an allowable expense becomes a critical element for people to be able to operate. The notion of where there is issues of clearance with some of the work. And I'm not a security expert, but I do know that is an issue that needs to be resolved. The issue of hours and what constitutes productivity. Those are areas that people need to lift up because as a cohort, the cohort that is different than what has historically been looked at in terms of demographics creates a very different voice for action that can be targeted specifically to your own institution. It needs to be rolled up through all levels of supervisory personnel to begin to mitigate the impact of bias because of those types of needs and requests that are being put forward to improve the home to be a workplace. Karen, you could have a list. I could go on in minutia, speak to your legislators. You just voted for these people. You need to tell them what you'd like to see.
Yeah, I think it's important at this time for people, for women, but also men, our allies, to speak up and share within your organizations what is needed. So we talk about, family-friendly policies, flexible and part-time programs. Those are things where I agree with Michelle, where progress has been made. The challenge, though, is also the performance reviews. A lot of times the way one is measured hasn't changed. So a manager may have the right to grant flexible programs, but if that manager then gets hurt in their results by it or in how they're measured, that is a challenge. So I think we have to look at not just the policies, but also how one is reviewed. And let me add to that, there's also a need for a cascade. So by the way, when I talk about performance reviews, I'm not saying that one is less productive. I'm just saying that a lot of times we measure activity instead of outcomes. And a lot of times women and people at home can deliver the same outcome. They just might not do it in a traditional way. They might be doing it after hours, or they might be doing it there. But I'm going to add one more important point. Senior executives actually can come out and issue policies and issue programs. But if they don't take action to also change the culture, make it possible for the managers to then execute against those. Because if a manager is going to get negatively impacted, they're not going to help. So it's not just the words from the executive management, it's senior and middle management buying in. It's a culture change. This takes time. This takes years. But I think we now, when it's so obvious, is a great time to have our voices heard. And believe me, I know it's tough. In my career in a corporation, I was often afraid to be an activist because I knew it would hurt my career. I'm not suggesting we're all activists. I am suggesting that we share our point of view with decision makers, because otherwise it's going to hurt, and there's going to be less women in jobs and less women promoted, and it's going to hurt the economy, and it's going to hurt our way of life. Other than that, I don't have an opinion on the matter, Renee.
A couple of things. There's a whole bunch of questions going on in the chat, but let me just say also too, our lexicon's going to have to change if we want to change the new norm. And it goes to one of the questions on after hours, which hours, right? If there's truly the need to produce results, then I have 24 hours in a day. I have 7 days in a week. How do I give me the opportunity to create a space of time that I need to be able to perform that doesn't have to comport with that 9 to 5. Right. So I think that also goes to this notion of a 5 days on, 5 day work. Well, as a small business, it's a 7-day work week. So the 5 days, I wish we could. Right. But again, it's reframing. This is part of creating the new norm. This is being able to shape those things that we need.
Kara, go ahead. I'm sorry, Renee.
I was going to ask you, there was a question that I thought for you to look in the chat.
Yeah, Chris had a question about changes to Fortune 500 companies. And, there's been so much great information about the ROI of a more diverse senior management team. And then, if you're instituting this at the mid-level, why can't you have a C-level organization that has a diverse C-level team or board, and then those individuals just prioritizing themselves over the overall results for the firm. And of course, this is one of the concerns.
Accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Accountability. That's the cascading Karen talks about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a really interesting, a really important point Kara brings up here in chat. I'm just going to read it and then I want to comment on it. She says, I don't have kids. I'm still wondering what is my new normal. And when I have a coworker and I'm her backup and I'm putting in so much more work and a lot of time flies by. In other words, I struggled with this a lot as a manager. I have someone out who, because of sick or maternity leave or paternity leave or elder care, and they're on a leave, and I can't, and the burden comes on the rest of the team. And it's very, it's a really good point, Kara. What about the people who are making up the slack and putting in those extra hours? And, one of the things that I often wonder is, why can't organizations have more flexibility on allowing one to bring in some kind of temporary help or some kind of solutions during especially difficult periods? I think we do need to get creative because it is really tough. As a manager, I wanted to give people flexibility, but I also knew that that meant that it put a burden on other members of the team. So finding creative ways to get back up in, to trade off in support, I think has to be part of those policy changes and practices changes that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think being creative about moving people around an organization, right? That's typically pretty difficult. Once you're in a job, there's usually a pretty regimented process if you want to move to a new team or a new group, and it takes weeks or months sometimes for that to happen. Is this maybe a moment where you can break down some of what are those organizational practices and move people more fluidly between teams, where if there's resource available in one team, you can move it to a team that's overheated?
And by the way, what about employer or state sponsored childcare assistance?
And Karen, I always would expand, anytime we say child care, I would expand that care, child care, elder care, and just general care, because consequent to COVID, there's 30% of people who have had COVID are expected to have long-term ailments and need of care. So again, consequent to it, I think we have to expand the cohort to which we can look at the expansion of care support.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the other that I also think about what I'm going to call digital inclusion. Today we have some amazing apps that'll give people help, allowing you to order groceries online, allowing you to get services online, allowing you to get deliveries online. But what about families who can't afford to buy a computer?
Mm-hmm.
What about the families who can't? I think if we could have more programs to help with digital inclusion, and tech companies can help with that. I'm not just talking about their employees, but I think, Renee, you get involved in these kind of programs. Any thoughts on that?
Part of it, again, we have to look at how do corporations, how do institutions engage themselves with critical partners in the community that align and demonstrate the values, but that also create pipelines for them as part of their equity, their diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment. And there's a host of ways in which organizations can do that, even now, even during COVID. And one of the things I'd say most important, we saw a lot of organizations make commitments after Mr. Floyd's death and decided that they were going to move resources, make donations to organizations that are in service in communities. And this becomes one of the ways in which, if your organization is one of those, maybe you identify exactly what Karen's talking about, mechanisms that enable that growth in that process of connecting with community, for helping to access and build a pipeline of services. Let me just say one other thing too on this. Allison Fine had brought up, back on, I know we're jumping around trying to get all these questions in. And I think this goes to your point, Karen. She had brought up something about, I don't want work-life balance. I want work boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Isn't that part of what we're talking about? What are the boundaries, role definition, team definition? What does it mean? And, as you talk about having greater fluidity and flexibility, sharing of knowledge, awareness of projects, working truly collaborative as an institution, which would also promote cross-team fertilization, opportunities for individuals as well.
Yeah, I think you're right, Renee, because there are ways as you look at a team, perhaps to balance work. Can you agree that everyone doesn't have to do the same thing? What if we broke the tasks up differently and allowed performance reviews to recognize that, and the different parts of a team? I want to just go back a little bit to Michelle's point about the economic impact, and extend that to entrepreneurs. Women entrepreneurs have been also been really impacted by COVID-19. We're seeing a decline in female entrepreneurs having the time to do startups and to work with startups. And by the way, this is a global issue also with the micro businesses around the world. And, I mentioned before that women founding teams only get about 2 to 3% of venture capital funding. Well, how are the VCs going to feel if they're afraid to rely on women because they back off on an entrepreneurial opportunity or a startup because of a crisis like COVID? And by the way, women-led startups create about 78 cents more revenue per funded dollar than whereas men create about 31 cents. And the ROI of
Karen, say that again, please.
Women-led startups create 78% more revenue per funded dollar versus men-led startups, which create an average of 31 cents more revenue per funded dollar. And the ROI, and I can put in the chat the studies that show this, but ROI also of female-led gender diverse teams return an average of 35% higher ROI. So if we as women and as diverse teams don't take the active role in order to get what we need to be able to deliver results, there's a negative impact on the economy. Michelle, I know you talked about this quite a bit.
It is, and I think part of that, the math probably in that, Karen, is men get more funding, right? I mean, just across the board, it's not just the actual participation rate of funding. It's actually when they do get funding, they tend to get more, and so that's why when women get less money, they have to work harder, and they actually do get a better ROI at the end. So, I think I worry about all of this, right? I worry about the long-term systemic impacts that this has. So how do we advise women that we see in the technology space to keep moving forward with their careers and really pushing forward for promotions? And how do you advise them on sending that message up to their senior management or even to their local town politicians about what policies should look like in their area? You brought up, you don't want to be labeled as a troublemaker. You don't want to be seen to be that person that's the agitator all the time. But if you want to drive effective change, is there a right process for that you've seen work well? Just any thoughts there as we're coming to a close here about how women can actually, rather than just sort of taking all this on, actually start to drive the change that we would all like to see coming forward.
Well, I'll say something and then turn it over to Renee, but there are lots of ways to do that. But I think allyship is very key. Look in the company at the men and women, and I include many of the men and powerful who can understand this, whether through their personal experience, through their spouses or partners, different ways that they can. But I think if we can have mentors and allies who are in decision-making positions and start to get a buzz going, then programs, then that can lead to a more formal structure set up to come up with the right answers for that type of line of business or corporation or organization, because it's all different and all the jobs are different. So that's I would put that first.
Yeah, that's great.
Renee, and I would second that.
Oh, go ahead.
I would second that. You know, situation specific. But I would say, again, lift your voice. Again, this is an opportunity to begin to define your path, right? What do you need to be successful as part of being in service to mission to your organization? Everyone has this shared experience of this disruption in our life plans as individuals, as employees, as institutions. And so now is the time where saying what you need is actually pretty common. And so the fear of being a rabble rouser, God forbid, an activist taking action, is almost probably seen as normal. And the key is to make sure that women lift their voice and not leave it, because you can be sure as whatever today is that tomorrow will be. You can be sure that men have had no problem expressing their concern with the kids running in the background because they're trying to move them someplace else, with their mother calling because the phone, the hard line, isn't working properly and she can't get the appointment with the doctor, but she can't go anyways because Lyft won't take her because she can't wear the mask. So they had that shared human experience. So women need to make sure they're part of the conversation of what is needed to be successful in their career for the institution. So I would say courage to speak up is what's needed to define what you need. And I'm sure there's others within your organization, some of your other colleagues, including those people who are the ones who are picking up the extra work and time. That's an opportunity to request a raise, a bonus. You know, so again, taking on additional assignments wasn't part of my position description, but I've done so willingly up until this point. And then I went to the Witty conference and they said, I have a voice and I'd like to report back how successful that advice will be.
Well said, Renee. I think we might want to end there. That is great advice. Everybody leave here immediately and go ask for a raise. Okay.
Ask for a raise. You know, worst thing you could do if they say no is to say, well, then I need to get better internet. We need the boosters.
Yep.
I need additional laptop.
Yeah, my kids are going to need some laptops over here. I need 3 more printers. I need an ergonomic desk and chair. You name it. Ask for it if you need it.
And particularly, you said one of the areas that went up was wellness.
Yep. It did. Everybody's focused on that. And I think those boundaries are important, right? I catch myself at it. Sometimes I'm sitting at my computer for 12 hours. I'm like, I got to get up and just move and make time for that. Exercise, whatever you can do right now, just prioritize it. Maybe make it in the middle of the day now. What's the issue? Get out and go during the 9 to 5. What does that even mean anymore? Go take an hour during the middle of the day.
And I think that improves our ability to produce the results and the impact that our employers rightfully expect from us.
I agree. We're running late. Please send other questions over. I know that our emails are available as part of the bios that we've been putting in through Witty. I'd certainly take some comments. And Bailey@idc.com. Would love to hear from you. But thank you, everyone. Dave, should I turn it back to you or should I just turn over to the next speaker right now?
Well, I think it was probably supposed to go to Kathy, but I'll jump in our virtual environment here.
Thanks.
Thank you
all so much. Awesome.
Thank you.
We do have, by the way, we put several links in the chat to go to the networking cafe and check out some of the exhibitors. You could go right in. If you just go to the VIP schedule, you could just hit join room. If you have any problems, try reloading the page. That might fix something. We did have some changes to some of the rooms people were going in yesterday. And with that, Michelle, awesome. Renee, Karen, that was such a great conversation and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks. Great
Everyone
to see
stay
you.
well.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
In the V Summits Expo.
I like the music.
Bye. Dave, do we stay on for the
No,
next?
actually, you should go into the VIP. If you can put that link to the VIP, go there where Laura just put the link in.
Okay.
And then you can go to the networking area. Where the companies are.
All right, I'll get out of this one.
Josh, I'm going to sign off. Can I make you the host without the screen up?
Sure. Great job, Kathy. Again, amazing.
Thank you.
Sorry, Kathy. I wanted to jump in and say
Oh, that's not a problem. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Kathy.
Laura,
Yes.
this one.
Hey, Sam.
Sam, password protected. We have a password for this one.
Oh,